Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Season 3 of Essence podcast, Into the Woods, in which I go and speak with pagan practitioners, folkloric traditional witches, and all sorts of other people in between. And today in the woods, I have Bret Bernhoft. Welcome, Bret.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
So
great to be.
Bret is absolutely no, it's good to have you. Thank you for coming on. Bret has been a long time listener of the show, and he reached out in the summertime to see if he could be a guest. He sent me some information about himself, and I thought this would be a very interesting conversation, especially considering some of the other pieces that we've had on with some of the other guests on this season. So, if those who don't know who Bret is, Bret Bernhoft is a web developer who loves learning, especially when making applications for the global web. He began his journey in technology with WordPress and Web Analytics. Eventually, he'd like to work as an artificial intelligence programmer. Bret has been a practicing pagan for about 10 years now, and his major interests are in technology and paganism and their intersections with transhumanism. And I will put all of the links to learn more about Bret down below, of course. But in the meantime, welcome, Bret.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely, as am I, as am I. So I guess the first real question that needs to be asked is, so you've been a practicing pagan for about 10 years. You were in kind of the tech industry even before that. So what attracted you to paganism to begin with? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
That's a fair question, and it's the same thing that drew me to technology. It's the freedom. It's the ability to explore on my terms, and it's the realism of it too. It's the ROI. In technology, a lot of people look to tech for what they can get back out of it, their ROI. With paganism, I wasn't being told exactly where I could and couldn't go, but more, it was paganism is a way of not validating but supporting and explaining the experiences that I have on a daily basis anyways. When I walk into the forest, I did not understand what was going on. When I felt better after doing so, I guess you could say. Now I have a much clearer understanding of why that is, and when I turn to other structures of belief, other paradigms, I wasn't receiving the answers that I was receiving from paganism. Paganism, there were much clearer definitions of why I was experiencing what I experienced, and that drew me in much further. And then the more research I did, the further in I went, really, basically.
Right. We were speaking briefly before about a book that was quite important to you in your first journey, and amongst other books. What were some of the major writers, or who were some of the major writers that were kind of pivotal to you in educating yourself about this way of life and this understanding of the world?
That's a great question. I've read a lot of different authors when it comes to paganism and technology. One of them was Starhawk. One of them, I guess, can this include technology as well?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
The name of the book is what I remember in the first instance, and it's Where Wizards Stay Up Late. It's a history about the internet, and the implications are that we had a very fortunate beginning as a species with the internet. We were very unlikely to get it, and there's a lot of magic in that story, and that's one of the books that drew me into the paradigm of techno-paganism, is just understanding where we get what we use every day, almost for most of us, where it came from. Another one would be Eric Davis, and gosh, the name of his book escapes me at the moment. Technosis, very important book in the techno-paganism sphere. Another important book might be, and the author's name escapes me, but the name of the, and even American Cosmic, by D.W. Pasolka. Perfect. It's a really interesting book about how technology, you could say faith or belief, and the American zeitgeist is merging into one paradigm, and it's through the lens of ETs. So very interesting book, very interesting concepts introduced. There are so many books I look over my bookshelf and I probably have 100 books that I could just name off one at a time because they're all so important to me. But it's funny that you mentioned books because books were definitely my introduction to paganism.
Mm-hmm.
Besides my firsthand experience, books were pivotal in helping me understand what paganism is all about. And I am a different person today because of the decision to start reading intently every day about paganism and technology.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people who are listening today would probably agree with you. They're very different because they decided to take up books and engage. And so this I guess this leads me to my next question. So a lot of pagans, nature-based pagans, nature-oriented pagans would look at technology as being destructive, or they're not quite sure. They want to leave that idea of technology, the perception of technology. So I'm curious for you, what is your definition of technology? Because I know there's many different ways to see it. And I think on a cultural level, we tend to have a very solid image of what technology is. But technology is much broader than that. What is your definition of technology?
I think that's a great question as well. And I think most fundamentally and immediately, the definition is empowerment, that which empowers the individual. There can be there technology like mad, in my opinion. This is just my observations.
Don't come for
Technology,
him, don't send letters.
right? people people definitely disagree with what I'm about to say, and it's just that technology, similar to magic, is neutral, and it's the intent behind the user of that tool that defines the operation of that tool. So with technology, you can be destructive, you can be constructive, you can be this or that, but I find that um, the definition of technology in my world is empowerment, that which empowers the will of the caster or of the user, I guess. Definitely the user, but of the wizard or the witch, either way.
Right, right, that makes sense. With that definition, I had a sense that that was the direction you were going, because if we broaden that idea of what technology is away from this kind of robotics and something completely manufactured and something metallic and metal, right? If we move away from this idea of technology as like the modern kind of computer or things like that, right? Only then any tool can be a form of technology, regardless of what it is. Would you agree with that?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. What's the difference for you then between kind of, I don't know how to ask this question, to be honest. I guess the end point I want to ask really is a lot of neo-pagans tend to look more towards natural tools, towards the nature-based and the natural in with their magic. You tend to look at other areas of magic as for that sense of empowerment. How does the two relate in your life? A lot of books on paganism tend to talk about the natural. You're surrounded by a backdrop of nature right there, right? But I mean, being in web development and interacting with computer systems and the internet and whatnot, it's a very unnatural sort of zone of reality. What's the relationship between those two for you?
Sure. I think the perfect example is the image that surrounds me in my background. This is an AI generated image. It's not an actual photograph. It was generated by an artificial intelligence. So for me, the two are very similar. I when I went through my first spiritual crisis, I guess you could say, I turned to Alan Watts on YouTube. I had no idea what was going on in my life and I needed some guidance. So the only voice that really seemed to make sense was Alan Watts. And when I listened to Alan Watts, he eventually said something to me or to the audience, who would hear him, that the earth is peopling and that people are doing their own thing as well. And there's no distinction in the naturalness, the organicness, the natureness of the earth to people to technology. And that the universe is doing its thing. You are a natural extension of this universe, and that which we create is a natural extension of nature. I find that to be very appealing. And the reason why I'm using the image around me in particular is because I feel at home with technological systems. I feel at home in those environments. It's not to say that I do not feel at home in nature or in the forest. I feel surprisingly peaceful in the forest, as anyone in their own natural environment would. But for me, I was going to say it's about mimicking, but it's not about mimicking. It's about the extension of nature from the ground to in the trees to the phones in our hand. And I just don't see a distinction between the two. Um, Ultimately, there's obviously differences, but I just don't see the lineage broken down.
Mhm. Right. How does that impact your like those differences then? How does that impact your I assume you're a magic user yourself or that magic comes into your work. How does that those differences impact then the feel, the type, the way that that magic manifests between those two kind of paradigms?
That's a great question as well. I think it's called Indra's Web in Hinduism, where they say that where it is believed that nothing is disconnected. That is, everything that pulls on the web touches every other strand of the web, etc. And I feel the same way, that is true in nature as well as on the internet. We are building sort of an Indra's Web in terms of the internet and our digital connections. If there are to be distinctions and there is to be a difference in manifestation, definitely the speed and the I can do with in my experiences, I've been able to take one message and reach many people very quickly. Whereas in the physical world, I can not do that as I'm aware. I cannot do that as quickly. I don't know the technology or the technique to do that. But on the internet, I can reach many people very quickly. And the scale and the sheer immediacy of the karma that I put onto the internet comes back to me is astounding. I can do something
Mm.
and have the cycles are much quicker on the internet.
Hmm.
That would be the
So how
basic.
does sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that would be the basics of it. That how I perceive the difference.
So then how does that manifest your magic? Like what practices do you, I guess that's really what I was trying to get to was, what form does your magic take then, your magical practice take then when you're, using more natural systems or using, artificial intelligence systems or virtual systems? Kind of what happens for you? What does that look like?
That's a great question too. I'll start with the nature part. I listen for omens and I listen for the voice of the forest and I try to just commune at the pace that nature sets when I'm outside or when I'm with my cat, for instance, when my cat is talking to me magically in the sense that it does, or that an animal does for anyone. So I would say that there's more of a calm flowing stream in terms of the magic that manifests for me in the natural environment. In technology, my magic has taken on the form of memes. I'm a big fan of memes, and I at least I used to be. I ran a subreddit that was very memetically heavy, and I was able to scale it to reach. I can't even imagine how many people I reached on that
Mm.
subreddit before I quit and needed to step away. But one of the lessons that I've learned from that is that man, it doesn't really matter where you are. If your intentions are clear and they are active, you're going to
Mm.
receive communication back from your environment. But when it comes to the differences would be the speed and the speed and the scale, but the technology itself, I still shake my head at how powerful it is. I could go deeper in my magic with technology, and I sure should, and I should sure plan to. But
Mm.
the magic that I've done with technology has been powerful. I think about the ability to take in a news event, create a meme based on a screen capture from a news story on that news event, and then publish or push that meme and see the immediate effect in dialogues on the internet. And it's not just about using technology on social media. It's also about listening for trends. And I use a technique called open source intelligence, and it's called OSINT. And open source intelligence is basically searching the internet for publicly identifiable information or publicly available information in unconventional ways,
Mm.
finding data on a photo, or I've created an application that searches for trends on YouTube. It's just these kinds of things that I do for listening, and the ability to see how some of my memes were picked up by other conversations and see how those would change as a result. It's amazing. It's amazing. And maybe in a future question we'll dig into some of that deeper, but that's what I'll say to that now.
Well, what strikes me about what you just said is that it's very similar to, the Terry Pratchett headology, right? That idea of impacting the conversation has power to it, definitely. But I guess where I'm struggling with that answer is that, magic and that intent and that will and putting things out there in that ritualistic structure. There's a certain ritual, like ritual is technology, right? There's a certain apparatus that you build through that ritual in order to engage with the universe in those subtle places, through a symbolic way, in order to then get what you want or to impact change. So for you, then, what I'm hearing is the mere act of just engaging with the technology is the ritual act. Would you agree with that?
That's a great question. Of yes, I would say that it is the conducting of the ritual.
Mm.
Maybe the thinking of the ritual is the meditation that I would do beforehand, or the listening that I would do beforehand. But the using of the technology is definitely the conducting of the ritual.
Okay, that's what I want to ask. I suspect a lot of our listeners today who are like chaos magicians or who are connected in with kind of those like egregores and other forms of higher magic, would definitely understand what you're saying with this then. But break it down for our other listeners. Um, so you talked about a meditation practice and a pre-thinking practice. So what happens with that? Help us to understand this a little bit more.
I'll use memetics or meme making as an example because that was pretty common for me. Well, what is a meme, anyways? A meme is a basic unit of information, and that it can be spread through a contagion effect. It basically is taking a representation of the letter A, putting a quote above the letter A. This is just a really poor example, putting
Mhm.
a quote above the letter A and then passing that on social media, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 100 million people have seen it because
Mm.
it was catchy, it was viral, it was contagious. It's just using the basic representation of information and then superimposing some sort of commentary or value onto that image, most likely, or that piece of information. Okay, so that's what I was doing, but how I was doing that was listening. In the beginning, I would use my social media listening tools. I would use TweetDeck on Twitter. I would use Hootsuite for YouTube and Facebook, and I would use my own software development skills to build other kinds of tools. And I would listen to what the world was saying. And when I picked up on something that was like, oh, okay, there's a charge to that. You can feel it intuitively when you're reading some text on the internet, when you're listening to a song, etc. You can feel the charge that the artist has put into that piece of media.
Mm.
And that's a very important lesson about technomancy or technopaganism, is transcending the bias against the media not being alive. Because when you just give it the authority, while listening, when I extended my will to allow the media to be alive, it came alive. And I could listen to
Mm.
the story of the media, I could listen to the story of the artist behind the words. And my point of even saying that is to imply that when I found something of interest, I could then take a representation of that. That was the meditation. I would kind of just, not with my eyes closed, but I would surf the internet and find something of interest based on my feeling about it. I would take a representation of that to wherever I was working with memes. I would superimpose some commentary on it, and then I would share it with an audience. And it turns out that it's very easy to get good with memes, and they're very powerful. Memes are extraordinarily powerful, and very potent at that when it comes to magic. And I would create the meme to reflect the audience. That's also a very important stage or step to go down. You want your message to reflect the audience that you are sending it to. Otherwise, they might not identify with it and they might not carry it forward, especially on social media. And I would basically A/B test my way into success. If this meme was successful, I would use more common themes from that meme. If it wasn't successful, I would just kind of let it die off in its own short-tailed existence.
Right, right. I heard something in there that was very analogous to charging, in the same way that people would charge a spell through more traditional magical means. Um, I'm curious about then that idea of aliveness. You spoke about, it becoming alive. And I'm curious for you, what is life like in this form of technology, in this virtual space, in this other reality? What is life in that space?
That's a great question. Life, it's what is life in a digital space is just what is life in a physical space. Everything is alive. It's animistic. The digital is not separate from, I don't want to call them rules or laws, but you could say the tendencies of this universe. We are creating another dimension in a sense of the internet, a timeless dimension, which is the fifth dimension. We are sort of creating this proto fifth dimension with the internet. And by doing so, we are not escaping anything. We are bringing our universe with us into this fifth dimension, into the internet, and everything itself is alive. You just have to give it a chance. At least I had to give it a chance. When I did that, everything starts speaking to you, not literally in voices, but just they're present, and like a, and I'm not a shaman. I'm not a shaman, I should say that. But in a shamanic sense, things start speaking to you when you give them the chance. And I started hearing their stories, and I like, there's more to this digital environment. There's more to these pieces of technology that we all use every day than we give them credit for. But more importantly than I think we even can understand at this point. There are deeper narratives that we're working within, that I've heard, that I've read, that I've in books. I've read little fragments about. For instance, in Kevin Kelly's book, What Does Technology Want? The answer to that question is to manifest. The answer is to exist. Technology is using, if technology is an entity, it is using our human nervous systems to help bring it about and manifest it into this world. But it is there, that's that kind of disconnect where technology is not natural or technology is not part of this world. I don't agree with. I feel that technology is, we are on a spectrum of this relationship between the tree and the speaker, or the computer monitor and the cat. So to answer your question, what is life like in this digital environment? I would say that it's just like life in the physical environment, but it is just needing maybe more recognition of its legitimacy. I don't think many of us view NPCs as being very lifelike, or non-player characters as being very lifelike, but they are in a certain sense.
I suppose in many ways that disconnect, especially in paganism, comes from a very, very old conversation, which is that conversation around egregores, right? That idea of, is something alive because we birth it and we make it, or is that just an extension of ourselves, which already pre-exists, right? So that question, but I know recently, especially with artificial intelligence, I don't know if it was a joke or not. I think it may have been a little bit of a thought experiment instead. But I saw earlier in the year a load of articles, and they were claiming, and I'm pretty sure that it was a fake story, but it did raise some very interesting questions. It was claiming that there was a figure that kept appearing multiple times, and it was like this haggard old woman who had a dead baby with her, and it just kept being generated over and over and over again. And I know in a lot of the circles that I was part of, the conversation of, the idea of egregores, the idea of virtual spirits, and the idea of, or spirits using this technology to manifest in a different way that they hadn't had the opportunity before. You said that, if given the chance, these, things will speak to you if given the chance, if you're open to it. Maybe we can start with this then. What was the first gleanings of this for yourself? When did you first start to experience things with this technology, and what did you hear? What started you down this road?
Sure. I think that's a really great question. I think the first real spiritual messages I ever received from technology was Alan Watts when I had my first, you could say, spiritual opening or spiritual crisis. I realized that it wasn't just CNN.com and it wasn't just Amazon.com at the time, I guess you could say. It wasn't just these major websites. There was a lot more to the technology and a lot more information available on the internet than just placid, non-magical kind of stuff,
Right.
obviously. All
Mm-hmm.
right. But there were some more to the actual honest answer to your question was my spiritual connections to to reality started before technology, and they started during my early 20s when I was experimenting with and you can cut this out if you want to. You can get rid of this if this doesn't make any sense, but when I was experimenting with psychedelics, I had some very powerful spiritual experiences, very, very, very life-changing spiritual experiences. And that opened me up to what would ultimately manifest as where I am today, techno-paganism. And for some reason, with those very powerful spiritual entity experiences, I find myself most at home on the internet. I find myself most at home in front of a computer screen where I can speak in my own language and listen in their language or the language to what is being passed around on the internet. That's the short answer to your question. That's the sincere answer, is that it was with psychedelics that I opened myself up to the spiritual world, and maybe 2 or 3 years later, I had my first real opportunity to engage with high technology, like someone would 500 years ago finding a volume of high magic. I found an opportunity of high technology, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. I can sense what this already is. This is very, very important for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
very powerful. These networks are not lame. They are not they're not benign. They are very real, and I want to do this for the rest of my life. That's ultimately how it worked out.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. That actually is a wonderful transition to the next question I have for you, because transhumanism is such a big thing. You said for the rest of my life, but with that idea of transhumanism, when is the end point of that, right? Can you give us a sense then, kind of when you started to become interested in the idea of transhumanism? First of all, what is transhumanism? Maybe you can start with that.
Sure, transhumanism could be viewed two competing but very uh, mutual definitions. The first one are the three supers: super intelligence, super well-being, and super longevity. Just to go well beyond human boundaries and to live a very super life. You're super happy, you're super well, you're super longevitous, and you are super intelligent. You have these agencies that are just beyond the human condition. And then another paradigm might say that transhumanism is a political movement,
Mm,
a a something you need to be more proactive in than just embracing the technology, something you need to take upon on your shoulders and help humanity with by advocating for it, by advocating for technology's integration into the human body. I view transhumanism as being that which lifts humanity out of poverty. That's the most important, because that's what technology did for me. My transhumanistic experiences lifted me out of ignorance by instilling in me the desire to learn, but the rewards for learning, not the desire. The desire was in of myself, but the rewards from learning, which is very transhumanist in of itself, that's what lifted me out of poverty. And that's what I think that transhumanism could do for anyone. As to what got me started, it was Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary talked a lot about things like futants, future mutants. When he started talking about those kinds of things, or when I learned that he had talked about those kinds of things, I was like, okay, there was some very important thinking that was done in the 60s and 70s, and maybe a little bit into the 80s. Some imagineering, as Disney likes to put it, the imagineering of our reality. And when I dove down into the concepts of like star seeds and futants and future nervous systems, or nervous systems that are helping bring this human species out of the dark ages and into space, I found transhumanism, and I started to think about. It started to appeal to me very quickly as to what this is all about. I got it immediately. It's as clear as day that this is a route to the future. I don't necessarily think this is the route to the future, but I will get on this bandwagon because it is exactly what I'm looking for in my own life. It is exactly what the kind of empowerment that I find technology bringing into my life, and I want to help make this opportunity available for others to choose for themselves. So I got into transhumanism because of that line of thinking. Definitely, I would say that the start of my entire spiritual experience were psychedelics. And if it wasn't for those, I don't know where I would be. Honestly, to tell you the truth, I don't know where I would be. And what I will also say in that context, in a very limited comment, is that I no longer participate with psychedelics because when I learned that the Eleusinian mysteries only happened once in your life. You could only go to Eleusis once, and you could only consume their sacrament once, and you could never talk about it. Those were lessons, I think, that the human condition passed down to me that I took very seriously. And I've heard of other psychonauts who've been told by the psychedelics to stop using them because they're using them too often. So I'm like, okay, Alan Watts was right. You get the message, you hang up the phone. That's what
it's true. It's true. I had a very similar experience too. Eventually it just got to a point where it was like, okay, no, the work is in going on, and I don't need to take these anymore right now anyways, right? Yeah, I think that piece around self-control is a big one. People come to spirituality, and it can be a salve to so much trauma and so much pain and all of this, and trauma, and then it just becomes an addiction. It becomes that spiritual bypass train. But that being said, I know that technology has also become like that too for a lot of people. That idea of coping with kind of the realities of the reality around us, and moving into that space, another space, a different form of space, a different aspect of space, right? As a way of coping. That's not you, of course, and that's not me, of course, but as we communicate on the internet. But it does raise that question then for you, that tipping point for you of, okay, I've experienced this, now I have this work to do. So what do you see your goal when it comes to your work? What is it that you're active? What is your great work?
That's another great question, because I've thought a lot about that, and it was digital media that inspired me to really take that question seriously. I needed to take two things seriously: my own death. I do believe I will die one day, as some transhumanists don't. Some transhumanists believe they will live forever, but I do believe I will die one day within a normal human lifespan. That said, and that you need to live a life worth living for, worth dying for. You need to live a life worth living and dying for. Something to be celebrated in of itself. And digital media creations are what inspired me to take that seriously. My ultimate goal is to professionally, I want to work with artificial intelligence. I'm coming from knowing absolutely nothing about technology to working as an artificial intelligence engineer. If that happens, I've accomplished the feat that I wanted to professionally. I brought myself out of ignorance by teaching myself to code. And then I end up, in my opinion, in the highest echelons of and developer in the developer world is working with AI. But more magically, I want to represent. I don't want to be or push or build an empire off of, but I want to represent techno-paganism because I see what was happening in the 90s with techno-paganism, and I saw magic. And there, I did a lot of excavation work with going back into the old internet and looking for resources on techno-paganism. And what I found were skeletons of what used to exist. A lot of the old internet doesn't exist anymore. It's falling apart. But at the same time, there wasn't a lot of new internet replacing it. So it was just falling away, and we were losing all of this work that had been done by Eric Davis and by what was the general the Invisibles creator. People like that who had done a lot of the chaos magician work in the 90s was disappearing. So my major goal with magical work and doing conversations like this, it's not to sell something in particular. It is to encourage those who are curious to dive into the world of techno-paganism, because it is an untapped resource in the magic world, and I mean that. It's a current that has not been fully utilized or even really discovered by the majority of who could be interested. And when we had our great global circumstance about 2 years ago, without
Right.
our great global circumstance, I met a lot of people via Zoom, and a lot of people were talking about technology and magic in a way that I had not heard before. So I know that the interest is there. There's a lot of potential, a lot of potency that's just waiting to be tapped and utilized. And it's human energy. It's not foreign energy. All we got to do is decide to do it, and the tech is right in front of us. So it's to encourage people to build their websites about techno-paganism and to start their YouTube channels about technomancy, and to have conversations like this about the use of technology and magic. Because if we could just reignite what happened during the 90s in today's world, it would happen so much more quickly, and I think profoundly, because we have YouTube and all these major platforms out there that are ready for content to be made and shared about this subject. It's not just GeoCities anymore. It's not
Right.
just, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes, I'm old enough to know what GeoCities is too. Some of our younger audience who may not know it, it was one of the earlier free web hosting companies, and I mean, I remember having a GeoCities website myself. But you're right, a lot of those systems are now offline. A lot of the old forums that we used to connect on are all offline, or are being taken over by cyber hackers or Bitcoin people, and just being destroyed, right? So much of that legacy we think will continue has just started to dissolve. You're right. I'm curious then. I've certainly seen it in the spiritual traditions I'm part of. People connecting online because they were forced to connect online. People becoming aware of the benefits of ritual online, of conducting whatever online reading sometimes. I'm curious about the safety then, the ethics then, because obviously in other forms of magic, there are certain ways of keeping everybody safe, practicing a magic circle, casting a circle, calling the quarters, whatever it is, right? What would you say, or how do those relate to techno paganism? What are the ethics of techno paganism?
In my observations, I would say they're the same thing. You can call in the corners. You could call in your circle. You can call in your your masterful spirits to protect you while you are performing your magic. And I've seen it work very well. Of course, you could also say that it is a little different because it's much more open. If someone has a link to your ritual space and it's not closed to only but certain users, you might have an uninvited guest. I understand that. And that is part of the dialogue that we need to have about techno-paganism. How do we mature this stuff? How do we make this, frankly, more legitimate? That's a great word to use. It's not illegitimate. Techno-paganism isn't illegitimate, but we could standardize it to make it safer. We could standardize it to make it more effective.
What direction do you think that conversation is heading?
That's also a great question. It's hard to tell. I think if I was to give you the real answer, I would think that we are on the trajectory to seeing more techno-paganism, and that there is a desire to make it safe. There is a desire to make it happen. But there's a lot of factors that need to be decided before it can actually manifest one way or another. For instance, meme magic. Well, there is a sort of, I guess you could say, pseudo intellectual or pseudo Cold War happening on the internet between different sides that are using memes to attack each other, and that magic is very hazardous, and that magic is very dangerous and costly. And if that magic isn't isolated or kept under check, that would bleed over into almost anything that we do on the internet, which it has already. That's exactly what certain memes have successfully done. And without mentioning any memes by name, there are memes that have taken over or that have a presence on the internet almost anywhere you go. And to address that, we're going to have to mature the conversation. We're going to have to dive into this, because otherwise it's going to metastasize to something even worse. There are no guards, no boundaries, and the internet, we could lose the internet with memes. It might sound impossible or crazy, but we could lose the internet to memes if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
My answer to your question is, I think we're on the right track, in the very, very, very early stages of the right track, but we need more buy-in and we need more engagement for it to take effect.
More people to the conversation, right? That makes sense.
100%.
Hey, I don't have any more questions for you. This has been I mean, millions of other questions, of course, but we're actually running out of time. So, Bret, I want to thank you for coming on and adding another layer to this season of our conversations. So many of the other guests I've had are linking in with tradition and technology in a different way, linking in with older forms of technology through that folkloric practice and that traditional practice. And so to have somebody coming from a very similar point of view, but using newer technology has been fantastic. How can people get in contact with you if they're interested?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on your program.
Totally. Yeah.
I love having these kinds of conversations. It's great to represent techno-paganism in one conversation. If people want to get in contact with me, I've been using LinkedIn as kind of my groundwork or my platform of choice. So if you'd like to get in contact with me, reach out on LinkedIn, or I guess you can't message people on YouTube anymore, so definitely LinkedIn is the way to go.
Perfect. I'll make sure that those links get down into the show notes down below. Bret, finally, thank you again for coming on. I've been Ben Stimson. This has been Bret Bernhoft, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Essence Podcast Into the Woods. Join me next week as I interview somebody else on my guest list, and otherwise, have a great day, folks.